Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome to the Defiant Lawyers podcast and YouTube channel. We are back this beautiful Saturday, and we have several important topics that we're going to break down and analyze with you all. We're going to be talking about the Megan the Stallion criminal trial. We're going to be talking about a trial that is very close to home involving Atatiana Jefferson. We're going to be talking about what the Justice Department is doing, and unfortunately, we're going to be talking about suicide as well. So stay tuned right after this as let us get into it. Hey guys, what's up? How's it going? This is attorney Chloe Corbett, also known as the Duchess of Justice. And with me, I have.
Attorney Augustus Corbett, aka the Minister of Justice.
And we are your Defiant Lawyers. We provide legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you to defy this unjust legal system. We're back here today live. It feels so good to be back, Dad. How are you doing today?
I am fired up and ready to go. You're right. We weren't on last week. We were the week before that. And it is good to be back on. It's good that you're back home. You've been traveling. So we got some important topics to hit. So let's get at it.
Let's get into it. I'm ready. The first topic that we're going to be talking about that we're about to put on the screen is the trial of former cop Aaron Dean, who was charged with murder against Atatiana Jefferson. And that hit so close to home, Dad, because it occurred out in Tarrant County, which is just a county over from us. And it was one of the earlier um, police involved shootings that really took a hold of the country. You know, even before um, Breonna Taylor and some other recent police shootings and killings that came out, this hit close to home. So that cop is finally on trial after 2 years. So I'm ready to get into it and analyze it.
Yeah. I'm trying to pull it up. So just go ahead and talk about it a minute.
Okay. So former police officer Aaron Dean, he shot and killed a Tatiana Jefferson on October 12th of 2019. And he's a former police officer, not because he was fired, but because he resigned before the police agency had an opportunity to fire him. He was then indicted for murder on December 20th, 2019, 2 months later. And almost 2 years, no, 3 years to the day when Tatiana was killed, a Tarrant County jury convicted him of manslaughter on December 15th, 2022. And I want to get into how murder is defined in Texas, how manslaughter is defined. You know, each state, each jurisdiction has its own way of defining what homicide, what murder is. And I want to discuss what homicide or murder is in Texas. Dad, how does that sound?
Oh, yeah.
So, the Texas Penal Code governs what are crimes here in Texas. And under Texas Penal Code 19.02, murder is defined, in three ways: intentionally or knowingly causing the death of an individual, or a person who intends to cause serious bodily injury and commits an act clearly dangerous to human life that causes the death of an individual, or commits or attempts to commit a felony other than manslaughter, and in the course of or in furtherance of that felony or in immediate flight from the commission of that felony, commits or attempts to commit an act that is clearly dangerous to human life that causes death to an individual. We call that the felony murder rule. So if someone is in the process of a burglary or robbery or some other type of felony and causes the life of another to die, or if they're fleeing from another felony that that person has committed and the individual dies, they can be charged for murder in that way, even though they were not intending to cause the death of another individual, even though they were in the act of committing another felony. If a person dies from the furtherance of that felony, you can be charged with murder here in Texas. And we also have something called lesser included offenses that can be presented to the jury for the jury to um, find that person guilty of the lesser included offense. And here in Texas, that is manslaughter. And that is what Aaron Dean was convicted of just a few days ago. And manslaughter is defined as, let me bring it up, if a person recklessly causes the death of an individual. And a manslaughter charge in Texas is a second degree felony, which means that that person faces up to 20 years in the Texas State Penitentiary. So that is what Aaron Dean has been convicted of. And now next week, presumably next week, they're going to start the sentencing phase for the jury to decide what the sentence should be for Aaron Dean. What are your thoughts about this child, Dad?
Okay, so I have a few here. In terms of the law, as you explained, in fact, let me pull it up again. He shot and killed Atiana on October 12th, 2019. He was indicted for murder on 12/20/2019, and that was pretty fast. That happened about 2.5 months later. And so, how did it go from murder to manslaughter? What happened? How did that happen? Well, I wasn't in the trial, but we've done enough trials to know what likely happened. Um, One side or the other, either the prosecution or the defense, likely asked the judge to include manslaughter in the jury instructions. So when the judge read the jury instructions to the jury, apparently the judge included at the request or motion of the prosecution or the defense the lesser included offense of manslaughter. And as you explained, Chloe, manslaughter basically means you took someone's life unlawfully, but without malice. Um, it wasn't something that you did out of hatred. It wasn't something that you did out of say racial animus. But it was still unlawful. Person still died. Um, and that's what they decided to go with here. And there are probably a lot of reasons for that. Again, I wasn't in the courtroom, but bottom line, we can simplify this. Tatiana was in her home, Chloe. I mean, she was at home. She was minding her business. She wasn't doing anything unlawful or illegal. She was home. And, a man's home or a woman's home is his or her castle. In fact, we have the castle doctrine here. So, despite the arguments and the defense that Mr. Dean put up, him and his attorney, I think the jury at the end of the day said, "Look, this woman was home. She was minding her business, and whether she had a gun or didn't have a gun, here in Texas, if you can lawfully carry a gun, it's legal to have a gun. In fact, most people here in Texas, I would say, have guns. So if you clear the smoke up, the bottom line here is this woman was in her home, her and her nephew, from what I understand, playing games, and they heard a disturbance outside. Now, as far as the police is concerned, when Aaron Dean and I think the other officer or officers got to Tatiana's house, I heard him say that when they went to the front door, that it looked like there had been a disturbance, and so they thought it was a burglary. And then they began to walk around the house, and that's the part right there that, to me, was the big mistake. When the police got to the house and saw what looked to be a burglary or some disturbance had gone on in the house, they should have went in the house, or they should have banged on the door to get somebody's attention from inside the house. Instead, they started walking around the house, and it was dark, very dark, and they didn't announce themselves. I mean, because instead of going inside the house or knocking on the door, they walked around the house. So Miss Jefferson didn't know who was out there, and she reportedly got her gun, as anyone would have, right? So, I mean, this officer just completely mishandled this case. When he got to the front door, he should have banged on that door to get whoever the occupant's attention, or they should have went on inside if they thought there was a burglary or something going on the inside. After all, this was a welfare check. So he was actually checking on the welfare of the occupant. And instead of checking on the welfare of the occupant, he started doing a walk around the perimeter of the house. I think that was the biggest mistake here.
Yeah, I agree. And from the reports I read, I wasn't in the courtroom, but from the reports I read, the jury really considered whether or not the police officer knew that Tatiana had a weapon. Um, and that's probably what took it from the murder charge to the manslaughter charge, because it turns on intent. For murder in Texas, it has to be intentionally or knowingly taking someone's life. Manslaughter, as I said before, is recklessly. So what you're describing, that, walking around the house, not knocking, going inside the home, not properly announcing that he was the police. If he didn't do that, then the jury may have considered that reckless when he killed a Tatiana, and that would have taken it from the murder range to the manslaughter range. I also read that there was some conflicting reports from Tatiana's nephew, who was 9 at the time where she was killed. He spoke, almost immediately to the police once they came there, and then he testified in the trial this year, 2 years later, when he was 11 years old. And there was a little bit of conflicting testimony. Of course, he's a young child. I mean, he just witnessed his aunt being murdered in front of him. I read that he thought that it may have been a dream, because this was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. He's a 9-year old. They were playing video games. Um, you know, the imagination of children and just the way that they view the world is completely different. So that may have played a part into why the jury considered manslaughter charges as well. But it's good that this officer was found guilty of something instead of nothing, and the
True.
jury did see fit to hold him accountable for taking her life, even if they considered that it was reckless instead of intentional. And now we move into the sentencing phase, and whether or not, and we have the question, I think we're going to put it up here, whether or not this officer can be given probation.
Well, before we get there, let me say a couple other things about what you just said. The fact that he was convicted of something is really important. This was an all white jury,
Yeah.
all white jury. And this was a police officer. Okay. And I'm never hopeful when police officers are on trial for killing a black person. In the overwhelming majority of cases, they're not even charged with anything, more or less convicted by a jury. So, yes, Texas is leading the way in the DFW area, especially in holding police officers accountable for killing unarmed black people. Jordan Edwards, young African American boy who was killed by a police officer. Of course, Botham Jean was killed by Amber Geiger, and now Aaron Dean, held accountable for the death of Atatiana Jefferson. So the DFW area is leading the way here, holding police officers accountable. So you're right. The fact that he was convicted of anything, um, is historical, quite frankly. And I agree with your analysis as well, Chloe, that when when the jury learned that there was a gun involved, that Tatiana had a gun, then in their minds, okay, this may take this out of the murder situation. And let me explain that too. Self defense. So, self defense here is what he was claiming. He was defending himself because he testified that when he looked in the mirror, pardon me, in the window into her house, he saw her pointing a gun at him. And so, in order for there to be self defense, the defendant has to prove that he is in imminent danger of deadly force himself. And that analysis has to be done by the jury from the perspective of the person who's defending himself. So the jury had to look at things from Aaron Dean's perspective, not from the prosecutor's perspective, not from even their own perspective, the judge's perspective, or anyone else's perspective. The law requires here in Texas that the person who is doing the defense, who's defending himself, is looking. The jury has to look at it from that person's perspective, and as you said, the fact that the nephews, um, what he said, what I read is he said something different shortly after to a therapist, that what he said to the therapist differed from what he testified to. And obviously, the defense lawyers were going to impeach him on that. We're defense lawyers, and we know that that's exactly what we do. We find what that witness said earlier, and we compare it to what that witness is saying on the stand, and we impeach him for it. We say, hey, look, this is basically, are you lying now, or were you lying then? I mean, because both of these things can't be true. You're contradicting yourself, um, which just throws some shade on the person's credibility and personal knowledge. So it is great this all white jury held him accountable for something. The family is very disappointed. The activists over in Tarrant County are very disappointed. Friends of Tatiana are disappointed that he was not convicted of murder. Now, so in terms of the punishment that he may get, so yeah, I'll put that on the screen, Chloe, and you can talk about it.
Yeah, so here in Texas, it's really a bifurcated um, trial system. The first part is for the jury to decide guilt or innocence, whether the defendant or the accused is guilty or innocent of the charge or charges they're accused with. And if they're found guilty, then you go into the next phase, which is sentencing. The judge can determine sentencing here in Texas or the jury. A lot of times, I would say a fair amount of defendants elect for the jury to decide punishment as well. And um, Aaron Dean can get probation if his defense team meets certain requirements. So first, his attorney must have filed a motion asking the court for probation, and then stating into the court, into the jury, that Aaron Dean is not a convicted felon in Texas or anywhere else. So that's the first step. They have to file a motion with the court, asking for an election for probation. and
Well,
stating that.
Chloe, let's make sure we understand something here.
Mhm.
Let's make sure. Let's go back for a second. This is manslaughter, second degree felony in Texas. As you said earlier, it carries 2 to 20, a minimum of 2, a max of 20, and up to a $10,000 fine. So if that is the punishment range, why is Aaron Dean eligible for probation?
It's because, um, well, one, that's the way that Texas defines it. That's the way the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, and the Texas Penal Code states that even though the punishment range is 2 to 20, if his defense team meets these certain requirements, then the jury can consider probation for Aaron Dean.
That's right.
So they have to meet those certain requirements. And if they do that, if he's not a convicted felon, if they actually file the motion with the court, asking to allow the jury to consider probation and the other requirements, then the jury can consider probation. Or if it went to the judge could consider probation. And
Bottom
some people
line.
may, yeah, bottom line. And some people may think, well, they just convicted him of manslaughter. How can he get probation? Well, that's the way that the legislature out in Austin wrote the code and wrote the code of criminal procedure that if you meet these certain requirements, that person can get probation. And it happens more than what people think. If this is the person's first offense, if you put up character witnesses, people see family members get on the stand and kind of cry or talk about the character of the defendant. And you show basically you're just begging for mercy from the jury. Sometimes the juries will hand down probation sentences in these cases, and so you can predict that that's what's going to happen in this in on Aaron Dean's case. His team is probably going to call family members, former colleagues, anyone who can talk about his character. And it's so important to talk about his character now because a lot of times you don't want to talk about the defendant's character in the guilt and innocence phase because it's what we call opening the door for the prosecution. So if you call someone to the stand to talk about how good of a person Aaron Dean is, but if he's had, um some issue with a former police case or he's known for lying, then the prosecution can bring that in and attack his character. So typically as defense attorneys, we wait to the sentencing stage to bring out all of the people, all of his friends and family to talk about how great of a man he is. So that's likely going to happen in this case. Um, but yeah,
And
so the
and,
first,
and
yeah,
on the other hand, the prosecution is going to be bringing up everything they can
yeah,
to say why he should not get probation.
yep,
So that punishment phase of a trial is where both sides get to throw everything they got at the jury.
yep,
Everything,
yep,
everything. Nothing is off limits with the punishment phase. For
yeah.
example, I read that um, Aaron Dean. I read that a therapist or someone in that field recommended that he not even become a police officer.
Mm,
So that came out during punishment phase. As you explained, it didn't come out the in the punishment and pardon me in the guilt innocence phase because it it really didn't matter. You know, the issue is whether the killing of Atatiana Jefferson was lawful or not, and what somebody recommended years ago was is not relevant. But it became relevant in the punishment phase,
yeah,
and um, and as you explained as well, if during punishment innocence phase, the defense had talked about, for example, how great a police officer he was, then that would have opened the door for the prosecution to say, well, hold on, Jerry, it just talked about how great of a police officer he was. Well, would it surprise you all to know that a therapist had previously recommended that he not even become a police officer, and yet the Fort Worth Police Department hired him anyway.
yeah,
So that didn't come in during guilt and innocence. during that phase, but it did come in during punishment. So, yes, during the punishment phase, they throw everything they can, both sides, to get sympathy. I mean, um, understand his mother testified. I mean, everybody is going to testify to get up there and cry and weep and beg, the jury. And on the other hand, you know, the defense is going to put forth all they can to show why he should get those 20 years or those 15 years or whatever the state is recommending.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the question you asked me earlier about why could he get probation. I want to explain the way probation works here in Texas. So probation is called community supervision, and there's two types of probation. There's what we call regular or straight probation, and then there's deferred adjudication probation. But I'm going to focus on one type, and that's straight probation, which is what um, Aaron Dean would be eligible for in this case. So straight probation is where the jury or the judge sentences the person to a certain amount of time in prison. So for example, if the jury sentences Aaron Dean to 5 years in prison or whatever the amount of time is, but they say, you know what? Instead of you serving your prison sentence, we're going to probate or we're going to allow you to do conditions and hold off on you having to serve that prison time. So you're sentenced to 5 years in prison, but we're going to put you on probation for 5 years. And if you can complete the conditions during those 5 years, then you won't have to serve the 5 years prison sentence. So the person is convicted, the person is sentenced to prison, but instead of actually going to prison, the judge or the jury says, "Well, you won't have to actually serve the sentence if you do A, B, C, D, E, F through Z during the amount of time that we put you on probation. And if you complete those probation terms, then your case will be discharged." So that's why he's also eligible for probation, because what the defense has to show in the sentencing phase is that the jury actually sentenced him to 10 years or less. And then um the jury can recommend that he be placed on probation. And then the judge orders it. So I wanted to explain that a little bit.
Thank you for explaining that. Um, Very important distinction, Chloe. Um, he is a convicted felon. Had he got deferred adjudication, which is very unlikely. Um, Not even sure if he could have gotten that. I'm not certain about that. But he would not have been a convicted felon. But this he is a convicted felon because because he was convicted, and so if he gets probation, it will be the straight probation, Chloe, just like you said. And now you were about to explain the conditions, the requirements that he must meet in order to get probation.
So once he's filed the motion asking for probation and stating that he's not a convicted felon, then the jury has to find that he has not been convicted of a felony. The jury will sentence him to 10 years or less. And then the jury recommends to the court that he be placed on probation. And if the judge finds that he meets all of those requirements, then the judge can order him to go on probation.
Yes, that's right. So, as disappointing as that may sound, um, to family and friends and activists and so forth, that is the law here in Texas. If he meets these requirements, the jury could very well choose to recommend probation. And if the jury recommends it, the judge has to follow it, basically. Um, Now, as you explain, and I'm not sure that people understand too, Chloe, what you were explaining. Let me chime in too. So let's say the jury says we're going to sentence you to 15 years. 15 years. All right. So that just disqualified him for probation. All right. That just disqualified him for probation. But let's say the jury says we're sentencing you to 10 years and we are recommending probation. So the judge then could say, okay, I'm going to sentence you to 10 years as the jury um, said, but I'm going to probate that 10-year sentence and place you on probation for 5 years. So if you don't violate your probation within that 5-year period, then you won't have to do that 10 years. You're still a convicted felon. But if you violate your probation, those conditions, then you will be brought back before me and I can give you anywhere up to those 10 years. Um, so yeah, if they give, let's say they give him 10 years in a day, well, that too would disqualify him for probation. The sentence that the jury gives him cannot exceed 10 years in order for him to do probation.
So we have to see what the jury, how much, if they, what the jury sentences him to, and if they recommend probation. But we did want people to know that if the requirements are met, then the jury can recommend probation to the judge. So
So
don't
one
be
more,
surprised if that happens.
yes, one more time. Those requirements are the the defense lawyers have to file a motion asking for probation, and they got to do it timely. They got to do it timely. They got to do it before the jury enters its verdict. Got to do it timely. And typically, what we do is we just include that motion in, we file it way before the trial, just so we don't miss that deadline.
Mhm.
And then the jury also has to verify that he's not a convicted felon and sentence him to 10 years or less. They can give him 10, but no more than 10. And then they recommend to the judge that he be placed on probation. So that can happen. That can happen.
So we'll be staying tuned to see what the jury does in this case. Um, it'll be interesting to see what punishment they come out with. We'll keep you all updated on that as well.
So before we go, though, who was a Tatiana Jefferson? I don't want to ever um, not talk about, these victims and they just be gone because they're not gone with the family and friends. And I want her memory to remain. I mean, I am a father. I'm a girl dad. And so this is not just all about Aaron Dean. This is also about the fact that this young woman lost her life. She lost her life senselessly because of a cop who did not follow procedure. I heard one of the expert witnesses say pretty much what I said, and that is that cop should have never left the front door. Why was he all around the house looking in windows when he thought that there was a disturbance on the inside? I mean, it almost reminded me of the Uvalde shooting where they all stayed outside instead of going in and getting the guy. Um, so sort of reminds me of the same thing. But who was a Tatiana Jefferson? From all reports, she was a fine young woman, a 28-year-old woman from Fort Worth. Fort Worth, for those of you who are not from here, is a rather large city um, that is about 30 minutes from Dallas. Um, if you ever come to Texas, if you ever come to this area, especially, and you want to get sort of the old Texas, the cowboy part of Texas, you won't find that really in Dallas, but you will find it in Fort Worth. Okay,
Yep.
Fort Worth is where we take people for all of that. Every day in Fort Worth, twice a day actually, they have cows. They lead a herd of longhorn cattle right through one part of Fort Worth. I mean, people come from miles away to see that. It reminds you of old Texas. So that's where you get that. That's where you buy your cowboy boots and your cowboy hats and all of that. You go to Fort Worth for that.
Yeah, it's what I expected all of Texas to be when we moved here.
Exactly.
I didn't I thought everyone would be, in cowboy boots and hats and riding horses and wrangling cattle and stuff, but most of it is not, but Fort Worth definitely is. It
Fort
definitely
Worth is definitely that
yeah.
place. Yes. All right. And she loved her family and she was actually caring for her nephew when she was killed. I think. I
Yeah, I
think.
read that. I
Okay.
think his mom was ill or something, so, um, family members sent her nephew to live with her.
Yes. Yes. She adored her nephews. She graduated from Xavier University in Louisiana with a BS in biology. And she worked in human resources, from what I understand. So that's a little bit about this fine young woman who should be with us today.
We would
And
be the same age. I was 28 in 2019, I believe. Yeah,
wow, yeah,
we would be the same age. So she would be
yeah,
32 this year.
man. I mean, and since then, I understand several of her immediate family members passed. I think her mother passed. I
Mm,
believe her father passed like a month or two after she was killed. And then I think a little bit later, her sister passed, I believe. So, I mean, that family has dealt with a lot. Please keep her family in your prayers. And I just wanted to end this segment by remembering and, just
yeah.
thinking about Tatiana. Because, I don't know if, I don't, I don't, I don't know if, I don't know if these cops understand that this is a life. This is a life that you took, a family that you shattered. I mean, it's the reason why we say Black Lives Matter. They mean something.
Yeah.
And I love what I heard somebody say today or yesterday. Not only do Black Lives matter, but Black lives are equal. So you just get the chance to walk away and say, whatever, I killed somebody, I shot somebody. That was that was a fine young woman who should not have died at 28.
And she was doing what a lot of people and a lot of Texans value, protecting her home. She had a gun. I just went to the gun range yesterday. Um, you know, we have guns, you have guns. So, and Texas is known for protecting our homes and protecting our castles. So, the fact that she died like that in her own home, likely thinking that she's protecting her nephew. Everyone said how much she loved her nephew and was so protective over him. Um, it's just sad.
Well, imagine what would have happened had he went to the window.
Mm.
That's how reckless what this guy did was.
And we gotta point out too with these dispatchers. I read that a neighbor called concern for a welfare check, but it went in as a different code, as like a potential burglary or something. So the dispatchers need to do better as well. Better training all around at these police academies, um, emergency personnel, 911 dispatchers, because people's lives are in you all's hands.
Yeah, that brings up the fact that the 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 neighbor who called 911, we've seen him do several interviews and he's just brokenhearted that what he thought he was doing to help turned out to be the thing that cost her life, or at least that's the way he processed it. His phone call didn't cause her to lose her life. It was the police's actions
Yep.
that resulted in the loss of his life. But in his mind, he has blamed himself. So again, um, our sincere condolences to Tatiana's family. Now,
Yes.
Chloe, we'll move on to our next story here. It is funny man, comedian Mark Carey. He had an experience in Colorado a couple of weeks ago, and we thought it was noteworthy, and wanted to mention it because it happens so frequently. It happens all the time. And it's frankly is sickening to me for every time I see this. So when I saw this video of Mark Carey being racially profiled the way he was, it infuriated me actually. And I mean it really did, because the guy was just sitting there minding his business in the hotel lobby. I mean, his only crime was he was black.
Mm. Yeah.
And that was what he was guilty of. He was a black man sitting out in the lobby. And for that reason, he was harassed and profiled. And he pointed out, he handled it so beautifully. Didn't get irate, didn't start cussing, fighting, any of that. He recorded it, and he talked about it while it was happening. One of the things that he said was that he was the only black person in the hotel. So he was like, okay, if you're trying to verify whether or not I'm an occupant or resident of the hotel, why are you not asking these white people? Why just me?
I mean, we see it happen all the time. Hotels, banks, movie theaters, in our case, um, our own homes. Just being black in America and living and going through life can subject you to racial profiling. We've seen it happen at Starbucks and restaurants where we're singled out, and things like this happen. So in Mr. Curry's case, like you said, Dad, he was sitting in the lobby, I think on his phone, drinking a coffee, and a hotel employee came over to him, asked him if he's a guest, if he's staying there. And just like you said, Mr. Curry said, well, why didn't you go ask the other patrons? There's several other people in the lobby. I'm the only black person here. Why are you just asking me? And of course the employee tried to say, well, it's not about race, and I'm just verifying. But we know what it is. We know exactly what it is.
We know
Bec-
exactly what it is.
yes, because it happens every single day. And it's these microaggressions that we have to suffer in this country, whether it be out shopping, whether it be, like I said, just going to the movies. So I'm glad that Wyndham Hotel took pretty swift action and apparently suspended that employee. We'll see if anything else comes from it. A potential civil rights violation, a 1981 claim. We'll see if he hires representation. But it's good that he filmed it too. It's good that he pulled out his phone and filmed it. That's what we recommend when people are in this situations. If you can safely pull out your phone and record, that can be the difference between one, maintaining your life, but also being believed by the public. So that was very wise of him to do as well.
Yeah, because nobody will believe you.
Yeah.
Your word against a white dude, you're already discredited.
Yep. Yep.
All right,
So
so we thought we'd bring that up and share that story with you if you hadn't heard about it already. All right, so Megan the Stallion, I'm
yeah.
going to fall back on this one and let you
There's
let you
so much.
handle this.
There's so much. Um So I'm going to try to focus on the key facts. There's been a lot of sensationalism, drama that's come from this, and I think it's because all of the parties involved have given interviews. They've made songs about it. So let me tell you the parties. So for those of you who do not know, Megan the Stallion is a female rapper, and she's been popping on the
Doesn't know
scene
that.
for. You knew that?
I mean, who doesn't? What, somebody, some old person or something?
Well, if you've been living under a rock or something, if you,
Right.
she's a very very popular female rapper. And Tory Lanez is a rapper as well, a rapper and a singer.
Now, I've never heard of him.
He's not that great, in my opinion, but
Yeah. I never heard of
ew,
dude before. Never in my life. So he's a
yeah,
rapper.
he's a rapper, yeah, slash singer. hmm So Megan, her now ex best friend Kelsey Harris, Tory Lanez were at a party in Hollywood at Jenner's house. Have you heard of Kylie Jenner, Dad?
I have.
Okay, so they were partying or whatever, and then the party ended early. Apparently, there was drama at the party. And so Megan, her friend Kelsey, and Tori, they all left together in a SUV with Tory Lanez, the security guard. So there's four people involved. The security guard, I think his name is Raycon Smith or something. Tory Lanez, Kelsey Harris, who is Megan's ex best friend, and Megan the Stallion. Apparently, an altercation ensues inside of the police car. Apparently, there was drama about.
Inside the police car?
I mean, excuse me. I'm still thinking of the police with inside the SUV, not the
Okay.
police car, the SUV. Um, Apparently there was drama between Megan and her ex best friend with who they were dating Tori. There was some drama, and Megan says that Tory Lanez shot her in the foot.
And by the way, couple things we need to say. All of this is alleged, number one.
Right.
And Tory Lanes is Lanes?
Tory Lanez's real name, his real name is Daystar Peterson.
Yeah. All right. So Mr. Daystar Peterson is presumed innocent until and unless a jury finds him guilty. But all of this is alleged, and this is what is being reported.
Right. All of this is alleged. This is just what I've read in my researching and the reports. Um, Allegedly, Tory Lanez shoots Megan in the foot. Their SUV is stopped by the police. There's video surveillance video from the police of Megan out on the sidewalk, stumbling around. You can see blood on the sidewalk. Reportedly, when she first speaks with the police, she doesn't tell them that Tory shoots her. It comes out later on the stand. Megan says that Tory offered her and Kelsey $1 million not to report it, but she did report the alleged shooting to a police later in the night. So this was all back in July 2020, and all parties involved have been given statements. Megan gave pretty big interviews to the big news media about what allegedly happened. Tory Lanez has written songs about it. There's been diss tracks, and yes, like on the screen, Lanes also allegedly sent an incriminating text messages to Megan, basically, saying bribing her not to report what happened to the police and paying him money. Now, here's the key, Dad. The key is Kelsey Harris. She was the prosecution's star witness. She's Megan's ex best friend. Just back in September, Kelsey Harris, in a deposition that was recorded with the prosecutors, told the prosecutors that Tory was the one that.
Question. Question.
Mhm.
Was the deposition done in a civil case or was it done as a part of the criminal case? Do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay. So do you know if Megan has sued?
I don't know if Megan is sued. I
Okay.
don't. I don't know. I don't want
All
to
right.
speculate.
Okay.
So, um, Kelsey basically told the prosecutors in a recorded statement that Tory Lanez was the one that shot Megan, that Tory Lanez bribed her with $1 million as well, and
Allegedly,
that
yeah.
Tory
All
Lanez
this
fought
is
her.
alleged.
All of this is alleged. I'm
Yeah.
just reporting what was reported in the trial. Um, and so that was what allegedly she told the prosecutors in September. This past week, when she testified on the stand, she asserted her Fifth Amendment rights against self incrimination. And she basically contradicted everything that she said in that 80-minute recorded statement, allegedly. So, according to reporting, the prosecutors asked the judge to play the whole 80-minute recorded statement in which she contradicts herself in a lot of key areas. And again, she's one of the key witnesses besides the the driver, the security guard and the driver who they have not been able to locate.
So let
So
me
this
let me let me make sure you understand. So
Mhm.
the prosecution, she was the prosecution star witness,
Yeah.
and she had a change of heart or a change of mind when they put her up to testify.
Yeah, because her and Megan, they're beefing, basically.
All right.
They're no
So
longer
did
friends.
do you know if the prosecution knew that she would change her mind?
No, okay. So reportedly, the day before she was set to testify, her new attorney asked the prosecution for immunity, basically saying
Mm.
she'll testify if you give me immunity. She
Mm.
wanted full immunity from any and all charges that could be related to this incident, but reportedly the prosecution gave her use immunity, which is basically saying if you testify, then we won't use what you testified to charge you with the case.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great
S-
question.
Yeah. So because what's kind of confusing me here is you said that she got on the stand, contradicted herself, and but the prosecution then asked for the chance to play her full statement back in court.
Mhm.
So the prosecution wanted the jury to hear what this witness had previously said, right?
Right, right.
Where she pointed the finger at Tory Lanez
Yeah,
or whatever his name is. I got you.
yeah.
All right.
Yep, yep. And so Tory's Lane's defense team is trying to point the finger at Kelsey and saying allegedly that she was the one who shot Megan the Stallion. Um, so and reportedly there was gun residue on Kelsey's hands, but not Tory Lane's. So it's been a lot, and there's a lot of
Well,
publics.
well, Megan gave an interview to Gail King. I
Mhm,
watched a portion of that where she said that Tory Lanez stood up the on the um, on the part of the vehicle where you can stand, the rail right there on the side where the door is, and shot her. She says she saw him shoot her.
yeah, but they were all drinking that night too. So I believe that the defense is going to lean heavily into that, into Megan's drinking and them leaving the party and the beef in between Megan and Kelsey. And maybe Kelsey had a motive because there was a lot of back and forth with each of them allegedly dating Tory and things like that.
So let's point out something real important right here,
Yeah.
and that because we're criminal defense lawyers, okay? Um, if you got this much confusion going on,
Yeah.
right? If you got the state star witness now changing to her story,
Yep.
and you got beefing going on, you got, I read where Tory may have had a relationship with both of them. I
Mhm.
read that. That's alleged. Don't know that that's true. In fact, I think Megan has denied that. And there are
Mhm.
folks all over, there are other people who are saying that she's lying about that. I have no idea, but that's what's being said. And so if you got all this confusion, All you need to do as criminal defense lawyers is use that to create doubt with one of those jurors, or at
Yep.
least here in Texas. I don't know the law in California. At least here in Texas, there has to be a unanimous jury. And if one of them begins to have some reasonable doubt about whether or not Mr. Lanes shot Megan, then you could get an acquittal.
Yeah. So you know that they're probably extremely content with all of the confusion and everything that's apparently happening in this trial. Because keep in mind, you all, the state has the burden to
That's right.
prove each of these charges, each element of these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. They have that burden. It is their job, their responsibility to prove it. And he has several charges against him related to the shooting of alleged shooting of Megan. And the jury can weigh the credibility, not can, the jury weighs the credibility of the witnesses. So they'll weigh the credibility of Kelsey, of Megan, the contradictions. They are the ones that give weight to all of the evidence that's presented to it as well. Now, I will say that there was a medical expert, a doctor that testified that he did perform emergency surgery on Megan's foot, and there were some bullet fragments that were found on her foot. So I think it's clear based on what's being reported that Megan was shot. The question is who? And if that question is in the jury's mind, then that could be enough for reasonable doubt. I would argue it is enough for reasonable doubt.
I would too. I mean, it's certainly sounding that way to me.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm a juror and I'm hearing all this back and forth and confusion, and they haven't even the defense hasn't had the chance to put their case up yet,
Yep.
and there hasn't been any closing argument yet. I mean, they're going to hammer this.
Yep.
They're going to
Yep.
hammer the fact that the star witness has changed her story.
Yeah.
The star witness.
Star witness.
I mean, so I don't know how this is going to go. It's looking
And
pretty.
yeah, another person that people are like, where is he at? Is the driver. So here in Texas, at least, we don't have to provide our witnesses for criminal cases to the state. So if it's the same in California, the defense could be holding him as a bombshell. Maybe saying that it was Kelsey who shot Megan. So yeah, I mean,
And
it's a
and
lot that's going on with this case.
yeah, and another thing is, why does she want immunity?
Yeah,
You know, why? What charges are you thinking about you could face? I mean, why do you want immunity? So yeah, there's a lot going on with this. Is not clear cut. This
no,
could very well end in a not guilty.
yeah, and Megan did what we always, and Megan and Tori did what we always advise our clients not to do. They spoke. They
Yeah.
gave interviews. They made songs about this. They've talked about it multiple times on social medias. They've sent shots to each other. I think Megan should not have given that interview with Gayle King, um, because there's a lot of inconsistencies that reportedly that she said that's a little different from what she testified to as well. So because it's played out so much in the media, that's added a lot of fodder to this as well. But it's very very interesting.
So you all please forgive us. We're attorneys. We try cases. We This is our space right here, and so we're kind of geeking out over this trial.
Yeah.
And but I want to go back and do something, Chloe, with the Tatiana Jefferson case. I want us to predict what we think the jury will do. I think they'll probably make have a final decision by Monday. They deliberate. They heard punishment testimony yesterday, and they will resume Monday. So at the end of this broadcast, I'm going to give you my prediction. I want yours at the end of this.
Okay.
All right.
Mhm.
Okay. Is that all about Megan?
That's the big things.
Okay.
I may make a separate video and go into even more detail about this trial and case as well because I have feelings as a black woman, but then I have feelings as a defense attorney as well. So I want to extrapolate on those feelings. So stay tuned, you all.
Do it.
I'm gonna do it.
Do it. All right. So, Merrick Garland. Let's go
Yes.
to him next.
Mhm.
This situation here, and this is not something that's going to take a long time. But Merrick Garland, I think probably his assistant attorney general over the Civil Rights Division is probably in his ear on this. But he's moving forward to try and deal with crack cocaine sentencing disparities. And as we sit here on the screen, the sentencing disparity for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine was 100-1.
Mm.
Um, much of this came about pursuant to the war on drugs that resulted in a lot of black male mass incarceration.
Can
Um,
you break down that 100 to 1 figure? What's meant by that, Dad?
yes, I certainly can. So if someone had a gram of crack cocaine and 100 grams of powder cocaine, they would get the same sentence.
Mm, that's
Okay,
crazy.
that's crazy. Let me say it again. If someone, if person A, typically a black person, dealt with a lot of crack cocaine because it was brought into our community. I remember it very well, starting in the 80s. Um, the law required if a person had 1 gram of crack cocaine and another person had powder cocaine, typically used by white people, another person, the white person had 100 grams of powder cocaine. So the black guy got 1 gram of crack. The white guy got 100 grams of powder cocaine. They are both charged with possession. They under the law back then, they both would get the same sentence.
Mm,
Now, during the Obama administration, that was reduced from 100-1 to 18-1. So now, if the black person has 1 gram of crack and the white person has 18 grams of powder cocaine, they would both get the same sentence. Okay? If the black person has 1 gram and the white person has 100 gram under the current law, then they wouldn't get the same sentence. But they would get the same sentence if it's 1 to 18. So there's still a disparity. So Merrick Garland is going to take steps to try and reduce that disparity from 18-1 and make it 1-1. So if the black guy has 1 gram of crack and the white dude has 1 gram of powder, they get the same sentence under the law.
good.
Good.
Because scientifically it is the same.
Yes.
Crack, rock cocaine, powder cocaine, scientifically there is no difference between it if you break it down to the science. So that is clear racism in the criminal justice
That's
system.
clear systemic racism.
Yep.
That's systemic. That's what we be crying foul over.
Yep.
That's in the system. Even if a federal prosecutor wanted, or judge, it's even better, federal prosecutor or judge wanted to give the white dude who has 18 grams more time, a harsher sentence than the black guy who has 1 gram of crack cocaine. They couldn't. No
That's
discretion.
a shame.
Yes, that's built into the system. So when people be saying there is no systemic racism in America, that's just one example to prove them totally wrong.
And thank God that Merrick Garland um is making that initiative. There is some criticism against this, and we had it on the screen because it's not retroactive. So it doesn't go back to people who have been charged before this change. And I don't understand why it's not retroactive. We know that it's racial disparity. He acknowledged it in the memo that he sent out via the Justice Department. So let's go the extra step as well and make it retroactive because this has ruined countless um, men and women, especially black men and women, with these mandatory minimum sentences and the racial inequity with these drug laws for possessing the same type of drug with actually no difference in the way that the science what it's composed of. So I think it needs to be made retroactive as well.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not retroactive or what he's attempting to do is not retroactive. I would presume that there's some legal reason for it. Um, because otherwise it's illogical, and it seems that Merrick Garland is trying to do the right thing. And like I said, his assistant or associate attorney general, Kristen Clark, I'm sure would be pushing him to make it retroactive. Um, so if they both, are not making it retroactive, then um, you know, there's probably a good reason for it.
Yeah. Another thing I want to point out to your point about one, the government introducing crack to the black community in the 80s, and then the government also passing what was it, that 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act that created the 100-to-1 racial disparity. I
I
mean,
think it
that's
was
just
I think it was 1996. I think it was 1994. I think somewhere in the 90s during. Am I wrong about that? I it
um I
crack
was
hit.
looking
I just
I
know
saw it as
crack hit the
1986.
scene. Crack hit the scene in the 80s. Now, I do know that. I remember that. Okay. Um, in the 80s, it devastated the black community, and I thought the crime bill was signed into law by Bill Clinton. And I think Clinton was in office in the 90s. But if you read that it was 86, then I mean, I stand to be corrected.
Yeah, I read it was 86 and it was signed by President Ronald Reagan. And I know that the
Okay.
crime bill came later in 94. Um
So you're talking about then the war against drugs.
yeah,
Yeah, that would have been Reagan. That's right.
yep. And um guess who co-sponsored that bill?
Who? Joe Biden.
President Joe Biden.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's tried to reverse it and said that it was wrong. But he not only he co-sponsored it. I mean, he was one of the bill's co-sponsors.
I'm
So,
not I'm not making any excuses for Biden,
mhm.
but there were black folks who signed on to that as well, and I'm going to tell you why. When crack cocaine hit the black community, it was devastating. It devastated black families. Um, I lost two brothers,
Mm,
two younger brothers from that era. Okay, I lost a brother in 1987, He was 16, 17 years old, and then I lost a brother in 1993. He was 20. And went and countless other people. I mean, it was a devastating plague on the black community. A lot of violence associated with crack cocaine. You had these drug these black operated drug cartels that were wreaking havoc in the black community. Um, Now, as a result of that, a lot of people, even black lawmakers, supported, because the scourge was awful, and their attitude is we need to do what we need to do to stop this. And in hindsight, you know, it went too far. It went too far. Um, and I'm not making any excuses for it because it resulted in a lot of black men going to prison. But anybody who think about those days, who lived those days, who experienced those days, it was almost like this pandemic, okay, where you got to do something and do something fast because a lot of people are being affected by this, and doing nothing is not an option. So the attitude is let's get this done. We'll tweak it and change it or something. Um, but if we don't do something, it's going to be even more devastating to these communities. And when these things happen, when these scourges, these plagues, these pandemics occur in the country, they always disproportionately impact the black community. Always. COVID-19, crack cocaine, the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, all that, Katrina, all that always negatively impact the black community. And the crack cocaine, and the HIV, all of that was kind of going on at the same time. So, not to make excuses for Biden because it was horrendous. There were some people who opposed it. I remember Al Sharpton opposed the crime bill, um, and a lot of folks opposed. A lot of blacks opposed Ronald Reagan because he was a white supremacist, about like Trump.
Yeah. So it put a whole bunch of black people in prison, and I read somewhere, I think the ACLU director said that it created a racial caste system in federal prisons. And so federal prisons, because of that law, largely became a place to incarcerate black people. And so now, finally, what over 30 years later, the federal government is doing something to try to stop the bleeding, and we need
Well,
to do it
if you
fast.
recall, under Trump, Jeff Sessions, he took the opposite approach. He said that um, if somebody was charged with a federal drug crime, you charge them with the harshest thing, the most harshest law that you can use against that person. Elections have consequences. I
Yep.
mean, they do. They have consequences. And at least Merrick Garland and Joe Biden has tried to right some of the wrongs that even they participated in, especially Joe Biden.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll keep you all updated on how that policy works out. But we did want to make sure that we mention it. It hasn't gotten a lot of. Have you seen it a lot on social media, or I haven't
Not a
seen it a
lot,
lot on social media? Yeah,
not a lot. That's why
that's why you
folks
need to
need to
come
tone.
here.
Exactly,
Yeah,
took the
tune
words
in
out my mouth.
to get that information because we're gonna bring it to you. The things that you need to know. That's why this is your one stop shop.
Come right here. We'll fill you in.
Yep. Yep. Our last topic is a sad topic, but we wanted to make sure that we talked about it. Um, and we're talking about the apparent suicide of Stephen Twitch Boss. And Dad, I knew about Twitch from years ago when he participated on So You Think You Can Dance. I used to love that show. I watched every season. And I think he was runner up on the season that he was on, but he stood out. And his dancing was so infectious and just so amazing. I loved watching him compete on that show. And then he got a very big primetime spot on Ellen's show. So I think that's where a lot of people recognize him from. He was a DJ on the Ellen show for a number of years. And then a couple years ago um she promoted him to executive producer on her show before her show stopped. And I mean, he was just known for bringing fun and dancing and energy to the Ellen show, to his social media. He had a wife who was a dancer as well, and I think they had 3 young children. And then we find out that he had died, and he had apparently died by committing suicide in a hotel alone, not too far from his house. So, and personally, like a few friends of mine reached out and told me how just sad they were about his apparent suicide. So it's hitting a lot of people very hard. What are your thoughts about it?
Very sad. I did not, obviously, I did not know him, but he had such an infectious, as you said, persona, television persona. I only
Yeah.
know him through the Ellen show. So, he's out there with a big smile on his face, dancing, and him and Ellen, just pumping up the crowd. Um, so can you imagine someone who has this sort of persona, this big smile, this good vibes, the good vibes that he puts out? Can can you imagine when you hear that that person reportedly, according to LA County, committed suicide? What? It I couldn't get my head around it, and I still don't get my head around it, other than to say it drives home the point that every smile is not happy.
Yeah.
Every dance is not joyful. We don't know what people be going through. I mean, we have no idea. And I've had suicide in my family. I had a first cousin who we believe committed suicide. And it is something. Death is already horrible, but when a loved one commits suicide, everybody is like, what did we miss? Why didn't he or she talk with me? What was going on that bad? I didn't know anything. I didn't see anything, or I overlooked things. I saw this. Now that I think back, I saw that, but I didn't know he or she was dealing with that to that degree. And then, when you look at these children,
Yep.
I, my heart just goes out to him and to his family. Oh my God, it's heartbreaking for somebody with that persona. Now I'm reminded of Robin Williams, right? The comedian who was always laughing and, you know,
Yeah. I loved Robert Williams.
yes. And I'm reminded of the CNN guy who traveled the world eating.
Oh
What was his
yeah.
name?
Anthony
Bourdain. Yes.
Bourdain.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm also reminded of that beautiful young African American woman who jumped
Oh
out of the
yeah.
building in
The
Manhattan,
lawyer. The
the
lawyer then
lawyer.
got into yeah, Hollywood.
I mean, these people who seem to be on the top of the world, yet. on the inside they're struggling.
All that glitters isn't gold. And I think because with social media, it's like you curate the best possible times of your life. So it looks like, everyone is just living it up and happy and just has this persona that they have no issues, but you never know what is going on behind the scenes. And then it seems like Hollywood just draws people who have various struggles, mental health struggles, depression struggles. I watch a lot of comedians. They always talk about, I heard one comedian, her name is Miss Pat. She said, if you don't have past trauma, you're not funny. And that seems to be the thing in Hollywood, not just comedians, but actors, entertainers, all of that. But even just regular folks like us, I mean, we all put our best selves on social media, but a lot of times you don't know what's going on with that person emotionally, mentally, all of that. So it's it's sad. And in terms of Twitch that I read, TMZ reported that Twitch took an Uber. This is just reportedly. I don't know how accurate this is, but he took an Uber to a hotel less than a mile away from his house, and he turned his phone off, put it on airplane mode, and one of the hotel staff found him, and apparently he left a suicide note, but we don't know what the contents of the note are. Um, but it's just sad.
Yeah, have you read how he may have done this?
No, I think it was by um, a gunshot, though.
I mean, it seems like someone would have heard that immediately. Is that what happened? You
No,
don't know.
apparently I don't know, but apparently though the hotel worker who found him was just going to clean the room.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
and yeah,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say I mentioned earlier that I went to the gun range. Um, was it yesterday?
Your mother
And my
just texted and
instructor
said it was by gunshot.
by gunshot. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And my speaking of that, thank you, mom, for clarifying that for us. My instructor was telling me that a lot of the gun deaths involve suicide, and I know we have some statistics we're going to put up as well. So in 2020, the U.S. had one death by suicide every 11 minutes,
So we've
and
been we've been on the air now. Let's see what that means. We've
yeah,
been on the air now for an hour and 22 minutes. 11 would go into that 8 times. So 8 people in America has have committed suicide since we've been talking.
wow, wow. And on that note, suicide is the leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34.
Well, it says a leading cause
A leading cause. Suicide is a leading cause of death for people between the ages of 10 and 34.
because for African American men, the leading cause of death is homicide.
Right. We talked about that before. So everyone, please call 988 if you are having suicidal thoughts, thinking about suicide, suicidal tendencies, all of that. Please reach out to loved ones, to someone you feel comfortable with, safe with, to professionals. Call that 988 number. And all of my prayers go to Twitch and his family as well.
And we don't say that just to be saying that. If you are hurting, if you're depressed, I've been depressed.
Yeah.
I've been depressed. I was depressed one time and I didn't know I was depressed, quite frankly. Um, so we all have those moments in those seasons sometimes where we experience situations. But if that situation results in you, as Chloe just said, thinking thoughts of suicide begin to enter your mind, please tell somebody. please, please let someone know. Talk about it, please. And there are things that we can do. That there are things that sort of stand out. If you see, I'm not an expert in this, but if you see people who are isolating themselves, um, people who say things like, the world would be better without me. Um, I'm just a burden on everybody. There are some signs, but anyone listening to me have who has those thoughts, please call this number 988. Tell somebody, tell someone, because suicide is not the answer.
Mm-mm.
Suicide is not the answer. Life, in other words, you don't, if the ideal is once commit suicide, I'm going to get rid of the pain, I'm going to be in a better place, that's not necessarily true. And that's a whole nother topic. That's getting into the spiritual world. But don't do that. And if you have mental illness, make sure you're taking your medicine. Make sure you're seeing your therapist. We don't know that Twitch was having any of that. I'm not inferring that or suggesting that. But sometimes suicide is a result of folks having mental illness. Just talk to somebody. Let somebody know. Don't, apparently Twitch was dancing through his situation. And that was not enough.
Yeah.
Go talk to your pastor. Go talk to someone. I think that is one of the most painful parts of the whole thing. The people that love him, like, wow, what did I do that my son, my child, my sister, my husband, my wife, my whatever didn't feel like he or she could talk to me. So let's let Twitch's situation be a lesson to all of us.
Thank you all for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Even though we ended on that somber note, we hope you all got something out of today's broadcast, got some information that you didn't know, um, learned about a law that you didn't know, enjoyed our back and forth, enjoyed listening to us. That's why we get up here almost every Saturday. But we love doing this. This brings happiness to us, you know, for our mental stability and self care. We enjoy doing this, and this is, I always love doing this with my dad. So thank you all for joining us. We can't wait for the next show that we have. You can follow us on all socials: Facebook, TikTok, um, Instagram, The Defiant Lawyers. You can find us there. We're also on all podcast streaming sites. So give us a shout out, give us a holler, let people know about us. We're trying to build this community. So thank you all for joining us this Saturday,
Well,
and
we
we
got
will
to give our
see you.
prediction.
Oh, yes. The prediction. Thank you, Dad. My prediction is knowing Tarrant County, knowing the makeup of Tarrant County, I predict that the jury will sentence former police officer Aaron Dean to 5 years in prison.
My prediction is that he will be sentenced to between 3 and 5 years.
Are you adding probation? Do you think they'll recommend probation? I don't.
I don't either. Now, most of our predictions, because you don't know what a jury will do, most of our predictions on this show have been wrong. I'll say that. Okay, I'm reluctant to even say them because you never know what the
Never know.
jury is going to do. But that's what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna predict 3 to 5, which means he wouldn't do it a year or two. Um,
Yeah.
so it's still in comparison to what this family has endured and Tatiana losing her life, it would be nothing. And I'm sure it would be very, very disappointing to her family, friends, and community. But that's what I predict.
So stay tuned. We'll see if our predictions are correct. Thank you all for joining us. Happy holidays. Happy holidays. We hope you
Yes, Merry
enjoy.
Christmas, Merry
Merry
Christmas, Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
This time next week, and we do plan to be on next week, will be Christmas Eve. Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
Wow. Crazy. Peace, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.